Tom Lindskog.
And what's your date of birth?
9/28/45.
And do you know you're being video recorded?
Yes.
All right. Where were you born?
Salmon, Idaho.
What was your family doing down there at the time?
At the time, my dad was owner of a mine down by Clayton. About the time when I was, just before I was born. And he came back and went to Gilmore, and then he went to Leadore. We owned a bar and cafe, and then we owned a store and a hotel.
In Salmon?
In Leadore.
In Leadore? Those were all mining communities.
Yeah, Leadore was not the mining community. Gilmore was, and some other towns around there. And basically the railroad came over from the Dillon area down into Leadore, and then went north to Salmon. And at that time they produced a lot of sugar beets and things like that up in that country. Now it's all pretty well cows and agriculture that way. And then south it went to Gilmore, where the biggest lead mine was. And
So, were you raised there in Leadore?
Yeah.
So you went to school there?
Yeah, I went to all but the 5th grade at Leadore.
And that's not high school too. Did you go to high school there?
Yep.
You graduated from high school in Leadore, Idaho.
Yeah, oh yeah.
How many people were in your class?
11.
11.
We had 50 in high school. In fact, we had our 50th class reunion last year, but now they're having an all-school reunion this year.
So when did you first get exposed to the outdoors?
Well, probably by the time I was 4, 5.
What were you doing?
Hunting, fishing. We had the Lindskog River right there. My dad used to get so mad because I'd come dragging a salmon up from the river to the bar, and they'd say, "Well, where'd you get that?" "Right down here," and clear the bar out, and I'll go fishing. We had the sneaky ways to catch salmon as kids.
Like what?
We had an 8-foot bamboo pole that came out of our carpet with a real fine wire on it, with a loop and a sinker. And one kid would get over there and hold onto the pole, and the other one would get in the hole and just slip it over the tail of a salmon, and he'd go like this. And
That's great.
And the salmon would beat you to death, and you'd drag it out on the shore. And then if you'd look, if it was all spawned out and white, you'd undo it, turn it loose, go for another one. Then my neighbor had an old white dog that we'd go down there with the poles, and we'd run him out of the deep holes across the rapids, and he'd catch him. And then the same thing, we'd hold onto the dog. It was bad when we'd turn him loose. If not, we'd pick him.
That's great. How far down the salmon did you fish?
Well, it was on the Lindskog. It's just, that's where they came up to spawn.
So, but I mean, did you go farther downriver later on to go fishing on the salmon?
Oh yeah, I fished down by Shoup in that country, down there by the Middle Fork.
When you were growing up or later on?
Later, well, pretty well when I was growing up, my dad would go down there and steelhead fish and stuff. And
Yeah.
so I'd go down with him a couple times. Scobles ran a guy he knew real well, and we'd go with him.
And then what about the hunting end of it? What were you doing
Hunting was
there?
right at Leadore. I mean, I've stepped out and shot deer almost off my back porch in Leadore.
When did you first have your first rifle? First gun?
Probably when I was 12. Yeah. No, I've always hunted. In fact, I still go over. It's 12 miles to the divide, and I go over and hunt right on the Montana line there for elk. And
You hunt on the Montana side?
oh yeah.
Yeah. So,
yeah, because we sat there a couple of years ago. Ed Lurtz and I went over, and we actually got lucky because the wolves ran the elk up out of Idaho into our side, and then last year they ran them out of our side back into Idaho. So
that's great.
it's some days you win, some days you lose.
Okay, so you finished high school with your graduating class of 11. Then what happened?
I went to Ripps College because I had a track scholarship down there for a couple of years, and then went on to Idaho State. Tried to make the track team, but it wasn't fast enough.
What was your events?
Oh, I was a 440 guy in high jump. At that time, if you could jump 6'1" or 2, you were a pretty good high jumper. But Then when I graduated from Idaho State, I taught in Gooding, Idaho for a couple years, and then I went to Frenchtown and taught for 5 years.
So you came out of Idaho State as a teacher, and then
Yeah.
and then you were at Frenchtown, Montana.
Yep, for 5 years. I was the basketball coach and assistant in track and assistant in football. And then the last year, so I was the AD. I got out of football, thank goodness.
What is that? Class B? Class?
At that time, we were Class C. Now they're Class A. But that's how much growth. We petitioned to go Class B for 2 years because
Yeah.
we kept beating all the B teams and basketball and stuff. And it was tougher actually in the C to get state than it
Yeah.
was in the B. And so I really wanted to go. But the Class B schools in that area really didn't want us. And they had 8 schools, was their argument. And so it took them a few years before they actually got there. But yeah, I enjoyed the heck out of it. And then I went from there up to MSU and finished my master's, and luckily hooked on as the assistant intramural director for 8 years, and then I took it over for the intramurals for the last 11 years.
All at Montana State.
Uh-huh.
So when did you start working with the Forest Service?
I didn't get in. I started working with them the year after high school. I worked down in the North Fork district of the Salmon for a couple of years. Then when I went to Idaho State, I went to the Caribou down at Pocatello. And then when I was at Gooding, I actually went on a lookout one summer with my wife. Iron Mountain Lookout at 9,700 feet. And
Well, now where's that at? Where's Iron Mountain? Is that
we could look out the window would have been to the west, to the east, and we could see Sun Valley.
Oh, okay.
Baldy, which was 9,300, it was a little lower than us. We could look out and see Boise. I turned in the Boise City dump one day, Vernon, and but it's right above Fairfield, Idaho,
Mhm.
which is north of Gooding, Idaho.
So was that like your third year with the Forest Service?
No, that was probably the 5th year.
So you had
Yeah.
a lot of time under your belt. Now when did you?
I had 9 years in before after I left there, I went up to, when we went to Frenchtown, I went in and worked with the YCC program for one summer as a recreational guy. And then I took over as headquarters guard for another couple of years, and then I went on the Lolo Hot Shots for a couple of years. So I had like over 9 years in fire before I applied for jumping, and I was 29 when I started.
Well, what gave you the idea to put in for the jumping? What
Well, I
changed?
would have before, but I got hit with a load of slurry in '68 while I was on the Caribou, and it took my knee out and an ankle pretty good, and so it took me, I had to have surgery and took the cartilage out and stuff. I had to go about 3 or 4 years before I would have passed a physical with jumping, because I would have been there sooner. And then by then I was too old, because at that time they wouldn't, if you were over 26, you couldn't start.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, 26 was the latest age you could start jumping, and then they passed a law in '74 that they couldn't discriminate by age. And by then we all had our jobs. Walt Curry, and I can think of Tom DeYoung and several of us old guys, Dale Lackner. We're all 29, 30, and 31 when we started, because we'd already had our jobs lined up that summer before we found out about it. And so the next year we all put in and got in '75.
Well, back on when you got hurt by the slurry, by the retardant, what happened there? What were you doing, and what happened?
I was on the Forest Service crew, an engine crew, and we went to BLM fire, and pretty well had the fire out, except we had one big tree that was still burning, and our pumper had quit. Well, we'd run out of water, basically. And so I walked up to the top, we needed a saw and we needed more water so we could cool it down and fall a tree and be done. And when I got up there, they had an engine ready to come down with me, and so I got a saw from them, and I talked to the fire boss, a young guy that he was younger than I was, and I says, "Are those TBMs done?" And he says, "Yeah, they are." There was 2 of them that were flying in, and so I started down the hill with the saw, and all of a sudden there was just a noise that didn't register quite right, and I looked off to my left, and here's one coming in at telephone pole high, and he got me with all 600. He opened both pits and got me with 600 gallons. I dove behind a little juniper, probably 5-6 inches, and it took it about 100 feet down the hill. The guy in the truck, he saw me dive, and he looked and put his brakes on and lay down in the seat. He went through, took his window out, took his mirror off of his truck. A guy below me had dug a big hole, a stump hole, about this deep, and he saw my chainsaw come flying by, and he looked up and he went down the hole and went right over him. So anyway, it got me pretty good, and I ended up with knee surgery after it, and shot a cortisone in the ankle and things.
Did they have to evacuate you from that?
You know, actually, they were so stupid. The guy that was running the fire, my boss came right up and everything, and they washed my ears were plumb full of and stuff, and they cleaned me up and stuff, and said, "Go up there and get in this guy's truck." And so they held me up in the engine to get in this guy's truck to take me to town, because they figured my boss figured I probably had a concussion at the same time and everything. And he said I was really lucky. I got right behind that tree with my hands on my hard hat, and so it rolled me, and that's when it twisted my knee. But anyway, go up there, and I sat there for 45 minutes. Nobody showed up. Finally went over and says, "Anyway, well, can you drive yourself in?" I said, "Sure. Where do you want me to leave your truck?" I says, I can't even remember. I just said, "I'll leave it at the Forest Service." And so I drove the BLM truck in. When we called in, somebody had called the district with the radios, and they'd called in and got an appointment for me to go see the doctor, and he checked, and he just gave me a shot of cortisone in my ankle, and my knee bothered me, but I didn't think it was really damaged, and it took a while for it really to start popping completely out. I didn't have surgery for like 4 or 5 months, but it was an interesting episode.
So you went back to teaching.